Sir Richard Oldman Harrison wasn't just a grumpy but likable character on the hit reality show Pawn Stars, he was also a man who built an empire with hard work, wit, and a sharp tongue. He became a fan favorite almost right away when the show premiered on the History Channel in 2009, long before Pawn Stars became one of the network's most popular shows. Richard had already built the foundations of his wealth. It all began at the Gold and Silver Pawn Shop in Las Vegas, Nevada. Richard Harrison and his son, Rick Harrison, opened the shop in 1989. It was their 247th day of business. It wasn't fancy or flashy, but it became a lifeline for people who needed to buy, sell, or pawn valuable items. Over the years, the shop became known for its honesty, expertise, and the wide range of historical and one-of-a-kind items that came through its doors. Richard was known as "Old Man" in his late 30s because of how serious he was and how he looked. But despite the name, he had the best work ethic of anyone I've ever seen. From 1994 until his death in 2018, he never missed a day of work, and he was dedicated to the shop and his family. Then Pawn Stars came along and changed everything. What began as a simple idea for a reality show quickly became a cultural phenomenon. Viewers loved the mix of history, humor, and family dynamics. The show became the most watched show on the History Channel within 3 months of its premiere and has since filmed nearly 300 episodes. Everyone knows the Harrison family from Pawn Stars, and the Gold and Silver Pawn Shop is a must-see for fans going to Las Vegas because of a key character on the show. With the show's huge popularity, Richard made $15,000 per episode. Bringing in $3 million per episode for the network, it's no surprise that Richard's net worth climbed to $8 million by the time of his death in 2018. Beyond the show, his wealth also came from decades of running the pawn shop and his knack for spotting valuable items. His legacy was one of hard work, sharp business sense, and the ability to turn even the most unexpected items into profit. But here's the question: how exactly did Richard Oldman Harrison build such a fortune? What were the secrets behind his success, and more importantly, who would inherit the wealth he left behind? To understand how Richard Harrison became the old man with an $8 million net worth, you have to go back to his early days. Born in Danville, Virginia in 1941, Richard grew up in a poor family. His parents moved to Lexington, North Carolina when he was just a year old, and they settled into a small house on Peacock Avenue. Life wasn't easy, and from a young age Richard learned the value of hard work. At 14 he was already driving a school bus to earn money, getting paid just $5 or $6 a week. He left high school in his junior year to help support his family, but Richard's life took a sharp turn when he was arrested for stealing a car. Given the choice between jail and the military, he chose the Navy. This decision, though made under pressure, shaped the course of his life in ways no one could have predicted. At just 17 years old, Richard enlisted in the United States Navy, where he served for 20 years. During this time he rose to the rank of Petty Officer First Class and served on 4 different ships, including the fleet tug USS Choan. His job as a paymaster taught him how to manage finances, a skill that would later become crucial in his pawn business. But life in the Navy wasn't all smooth sailing. Richard spent 14 of his 20 years deployed at sea, away from his family. He once said, "That's the only thing I didn't care for." No matter how hard things got, Richard stayed in the service because he felt he had to. One of his duties was to his family. Richard married his neighborhood sweetheart, Joanne Rue, in 1960, not long after having their first child, Sherry, who was born with Down syndrome, so that they could pay for all of her medical bills. Richard went back into the Navy after taking a short break. Sherry tragically died when she was 6 years old, but her memory and the sacrifices Richard made for her shaped him into the kind of man who always puts his family first. When Richard retired from the Navy in 1979, he and Joanne were faced with a new challenge. Joanne had built a successful real estate business, and Richard joined her as a part-time worker for a while. For a while, they were doing very well, but the economic downturn in the early 1980s and skyrocketing mortgage interest rates put an end to their success. They lost almost everything, including $1 million in savings, and now they only have $5,000 left. It was a big move for Richard and Joanne, who had 3 boys. In 1981, to start over. It was in Las Vegas that Richard's business sense and determination really showed. With their last bit of money, he and his son, Rick, opened the gold and silver coin shop in a small 300-foot space. It wasn't fancy, but it was a start. Over time, they moved to a bigger space and grew their business, eventually getting a license to buy and sell used goods. But Richard and Rick had bigger plans. They wanted to open a pawn shop, which required a special license in Las Vegas at the time. The city only gave out one pawn license for every 50,000 residents, so the Harrisons had to wait until the population reached 250,000. When it did, in 1989, they opened the gold and silver pawn shop, just 2 miles from the Las Vegas Strip. The business steadily grew, and by 2005, Richard and Rick were lending about $3 million a year and making $700,000 in interest. The pawn shop became a gathering place for gamblers, collectors, and history buffs alike. The shelves were full of jewelry, sports memorabilia, and rare items with interesting stories. Richard was renowned for his keen perception and unwavering determination during negotiations. He could tell a fake from the real thing in an instant and wasn't afraid to back out of a bad deal. His time in the Navy taught him discipline, and his years of suffering had taught him wisdom. But in 2009, when the History Channel showed Pawn Stars, everything changed. The show made the family business famous all over the world. The show's mix of history, humor, and family relationships made it a giant hit right away. In just 3 months, it became the network's most popular show. For Richard, fame came as a surprise, but he dealt with it in his own way. He was known for being grumpy but likable, and he often played the grumpy father behind the scenes, even though he was very involved in the business and often got to the shop early and stayed late to make sure everything ran smoothly. The success of Pawn Stars made the Harrison family very wealthy. The shop's daily customer count skyrocketed from 70 to between 3,000 and 5,000 by 2012. Tourists lined up to meet the Harrison family and visit the store that had become a part of pop culture history. Richard made $15,000 per episode, which added to his growing wealth. By the time he died in 2018, his net worth was estimated to be $8 million. But Richard's wealth wasn't just about money, it was about the values he taught his children and grandchildren about the importance of hard work, honesty, and resilience. Despite his success, he never forgot where he came from or the struggles that made him who he was. He believed that you should move on and live your life to the fullest. Who would get the money that Richard worked so hard to build? How did his death affect his family and the business he lived and worked in? Harrison died in June 2018. He was known for having a sharp mind, a rough sense of humor, and a deep love for his family. His impact went far beyond the walls of the gold and silver pawn shop. Richard's death marked the end of an era, but as with any family fortune, it raised questions about who would continue his work and benefit from the empire he built. Richards will laid out his estate, which was worth about $8 million. His spouse, Joanne, and his 3 sons, Rick, Joseph, and Christopher, were initially named beneficiaries in his will. In a shocking change just 1 year before he died, Richard took his youngest son, Christopher, off the list of beneficiaries in his will. In the new version, he wrote, "I would like to express my love and affection for Christopher Keith Harrison, however, for the purposes of this, I have intentionally and with full knowledge failed to provide for him and his issue." Many friends and even some family members didn't understand why Richard would leave his youngest son out of the will. What had happened to make him make such a brave choice? Unfortunately, Richard never explained his choice, so we still don't know why he made it. Regardless of the outcome, it was evident that he meticulously considered the distribution of his wealth. He left most of his money to his wife, Joanne, and his son, Rick, who had worked with him for decades to run the pawn shop. Since Rick was the oldest son and had the most involvement in the business, the estate named him the executive. This meant that he had control over his father's property. Rick was deeply saddened by his father's death, having worked with him since the pawn shop opened in 1989. He called Richard his hero and said that Richard taught him the value of hard work, honesty, and humor. For Rick, continuing the family business wasn't just a duty, it was a way to honor his father's memory. Pawn Shop is still a successful business and a must-see for Pawn Stars fans, but Richard's death affected more than just Rick, who is his grandson. It was challenging for Corey Harrison to carry on the tradition of his grandfather, whom fans call Big Hose. Corey learned how to run the pawn shop from both his father and grandfather. He often discussed how much he admired Richard's work ethic and business sense. When Richard died, Corey vowed to carry on the lessons his grandfather had taught him in the shop and in life. Austin Chumley Russell is another important person in the family. Corey's childhood friend and one of the show's big stars, but not related by blood, Richard treated Chumley like family. He made fun of him on the show a lot, but it was clear he liked him. Chumley says that Richard helped him grow as a person and as a worker. He will always remember the things Richard taught him, especially how to stay grounded and work hard. Richard's wife, after being married to Richard for almost 60 years, Joanne played a less public but just as important part in the family. During the ups and downs of their journey, from their early struggles in real estate to their eventual success in the pawn business, Joanne was there for him every step of the way. After Richard's death, Joanne remained an important figure in the family, giving her children and grandchildren strength and advice. But Richard's influence didn't end with his immediate family. Millions of people who watched Pawn Stars came to love the old man for his wit, wisdom, and straightforward approach to life. In the days after his death, tributes came in from all over the world. Fans shared their favorite moments from the show, remembering Richard's grumpy but endearing personality. Co-workers from the History Channel and other shows, like American Restoration and Counting Cars, also paid their respects, showing how much of an impact he had on the world of reality television. One of the most touching tributes was a special episode of Pawn Stars called A Treasure Remembered. Was an episode that honored Richard's life and impact. It had interviews with his family and some of his best moments from his time on the show. It gave fans and family a chance to think about the man who had become a cultural icon while staying true to himself. Richard had an undeniable effect on the business, but he had an even bigger effect on his family. He taught them to value hard work and to never give up, no matter how difficult things got. These lessons got the family through some tough times, from the early days of the pawn shop to the problems that came with Richard's fame and success. Richard never cared about money or fame, he wanted to build something his family could be proud of. So, even though the way his estate was divided may have caused some controversy, there's no denying the strength of the legacy. Richard "Old Man" Harrison died, but his family still remembers him by running the business he started, teaching the next generation about his values, and keeping his memory alive through the show that made him famous. But what about Richard's work outside of the pawn shop? How did he use his fame and platform to make a difference in the world, and what awards and honors did he receive for his contributions to the industry? Harrison wasn't just a star on Pawn Stars or the owner of a famous pawn shop, he became a symbol of hard work, determination, and pride in his work. Harrison's influence went beyond the show, and over the years he received many awards and honors for his contributions to the community and the industry. In March 2010, Richard and the rest of the Pawn Stars cast received one of the most important awards they had ever received. Las Vegas Mayor Oscar Goodman gave them a key to the city. This wasn't just to honor their success as a show, it was also a nod to their part in bringing people to Las Vegas and highlighting the city's unique culture. The Harrisons showed their gratitude by giving the mayor a set of valuable coins. This showed how deeply connected they were to the city that gave them their start. Not only that, but Richard was also honored in 2012 in Lexington, North Carolina, where he grew up and formed the beliefs that would guide his life. Mayor Clark Newell gave him the key to the city and made it official that a day would be named in his honor. Richard Harrison's Day. It was a chance for Richard to think about how far he had come from his small beginnings in Lexington. Later that year, the cast of Pawn Stars served as grand marshals at the History 300 NASCAR race at the Charlotte Motor Speedway. It was a moment that showed how the show had become popular. What began as a small family business had become a phenomenon, and Richard was at the center of it all. In July 2012, the Clark County Commission named July 17 Pawn Stars Gold and Silver Pawn Day. During the ceremony, Richard didn't just bask in the attention, he gave $1,000 to the Clark County Museum and even lent them a unique piece of history, a U.S. Senate floor chair once used by Senator Patrick McCarran, for a special display. This action showed that Richard cared about history and wanted to share it with others. Richard's contributions didn't go unnoticed by national platforms either. In 2012 he and his son Rick were nominated for the Time 100 list, a significant honor that highlighted their influence not just in the pawn industry but in popular culture as well. But Richard's recognition wasn't limited to awards and ceremonies. He also used his platform to support important causes. In 2012, he made a special appearance at a celebrity bingo bout charity event at the Silverton Casino Lodge, showing his willingness to lend his fame to good causes. These efforts reflected his belief in giving back and using his influence to make a difference beyond the awards and charity work. Richard's personality and presence had a lasting impact. Fans loved him for his dry wit and gruff charm, and he became an icon in the world of reality television. He wasn't afraid to be himself, whether he was negotiating a deal in the shop or cracking jokes on camera. Even after his passing, Richard's legacy continued to be celebrated. The show dedicated a special episode titled A Treasure Remembered was a tribute to the man who helped build the gold and silver pawn shop, but it was also a way to show how much he meant to the fans, the community, and the industry he helped shape. Richard Harrison's journey from a small-town boy to a globally renowned figure exemplifies the potential achieved through hard work and persistence. He may have started out with little, but he left behind a fortune in lessons, values, and memories. While his awards and recognition were well-deserved, his true impact is in the lives he touched, whether it was through the family he raised, the fans he entertained, or the causes he supported. Richard Harrison changed the world, and money and fame cannot replace that.